Where do you think that standardization fits into this whole piece?
I think standardization is the key to all of this. I think it's the first place to really fix a lot of this issues, at least from the beginning standpoint. And I think it would have the biggest impact across the industry. The reason why I think standardization in the context of documentation and the procedure side is because I think when we have to be realistic, we don't have enough experienced BCBAs out there mentoring. I think a lot of places we have BCBAs who have less than 5 years, who are in clinical director positions, who are like over a lot of people. I think that we just have to be realistic and pragmatic. That is what's happening. It's by no means a good situation, but it is a situation we're in at this point. Standardization of the documentation would really help in about 4 or 5 major ways. One, it would give I call it bumper pads on the side of the road to try to keep new BCBAs and young BCBAs from going off into the weeds, so to speak, because they would have a framework to follow. Documentation is not necessary. This is not saying let's standardize a treatment, but it's saying there is certain protocols. Like if you're going on site and you're seeing this from a child, this should indicate these type of assessments, this type of work, this type of stuff, right? It should give you some framework to follow. The other reason why that's really important is because if we standardize that documentation, as an experienced BCBA, I would be able to oversee more people, and when red flags would come up faster for me to be able to do it without me actually having to be on those cases. Because right now, just because I'm overseeing something, this is what I can't figure this. And again, shows the lack of experience by some of the clinical directors. How do you know that those treatment plans are good and those goals are good? Because you almost have to be on site to see if what they did was accurate, because you have no checklist right now. You have no way to see, did their decision making go from point A to point B correctly? Like there's no decision tree that they're using. And we're trying to say there are decision trees. There are methodologies that A goes to B, B goes to C, and that you as a experienced BCBA could monitor. And that's what could pull up and tell you, oh, we got a problem here, because how accurate is these assessments and how accurate are they writing these assessments to the treatment plan? There's no way to evaluate that unless you're actually seeing the kid. And that's virtually impossible as a clinical director with all these cases. So standardization would help in bringing our young people into the field and giving them a framework that they don't have to necessarily, because they're not getting this in schools, we're not getting it anywhere else, and we don't have to necessarily rely on individual companies to be doing a good job, right? The second part of this is that it would help with quality of care, because now we have a way to look at things and say, wait a minute, you have a 3-year-old who has these mediators. Now, again, I'm not saying that we're going to be able to do this, it's going to be clean, because I never want to see what happened in the 90s and the 2000s when what happened in schools, where they went in, they were evaluating teachers and saying, well, your kid's scores are not high. Well, never looking at the mediators. Well, they were in an extremely poverty-filled school. I mean, you know the thing. I mean, I always made the joke. I can tell you exactly what a school scores are by looking at their poverty levels. So we don't want to be unfairly doing something to anyone. But a 3-year-old who has this level of severity, who meets these benchmarks, how fast should they be moving through, let's say, matching? Or how fast should they be moving through certain goals, right? As a BCBA, most BCBAs who have experience can tell you, they can kind of tell when they're not meeting their goals and when they are meeting their goals, kind of stuff. But most inexperienced BCBAs don't. This would give all BCBAs, but it would also give clinical directors a way to look and say, hey, we're not where we should be. Because remember, when someone tells me that they've made 80% progress on their goals, that doesn't mean anything, because you wrote the goals. You could have wrote bad goals in the first place. So who knows what the 80% means? But if you had more of a standardized way of evaluating these children across certain spectrums and certain ways of looking at it, then now you can say, whoa, you're not meeting benchmarks. Let's go in and see. Now, that doesn't mean we're going to penalize anyone, but at least an experienced person can come in and say, let me see if I can help you. How can I provide you? Because that way it allows experienced BCBAs to target who they're looking at so that they can go in and help those people and provide more guidance. Most young BCBAs don't even know if they need help on a case. A case might be well outside their framework and they don't realize it because they don't know how to look and recognize it. So the standardization would bring those red flags faster to the front. The third thing that would really help us is with insurance companies. Because I am frustrated that at my company, I was on almost all the calls, exception to those who were very experienced BCBAs, who had years of experience. Because the insurance companies intimidate BCBAs. They say, nope, we're not going to do this, we're not going to do that, whatever, right? And I'm like, nope, that doesn't know how that works. I would be on those calls and I'm like, no. And I would fight back, and I could use the research. I could use all the things that I knew. So my training plans always went through, so did all my staff. And I made sure of that because we were able to fight back. One of the things about standardization documentation is that if we start standardizing this, we could start using each other as a format to say, no, look, there is now 20,000 kids who we now all have the same documentation. We can now compare, do meta-analysis. We can do all this other stuff with it. We can show that, yes, these hours doing these goals make this difference on these symptoms. Right now, we can't do that. We don't have that ability. And that would really help us with insurance companies, because I think insurance companies are pushing back. We're losing training hours. We're losing the ability to all these things are happening. Rates are changing. It's crazy how vast the rates are across different states. So it's causing issues. And this would be a way to help. It also, and this is one that I think is going to cause the most concern for some people because of how I'm going to say this, but I'm going to say it, okay? Companies that do training and actually train their BCBAs, who actually train their RBTs, who actually put the money and the time in, their numbers are going to be higher. And they can now argue for better rates. Because if I'm spending, and I'm doing 20 hours of RBT training with my BTs before they even get onto a case, I have to absorb that cost in my company. Well, when I absorb that cost, but my BT does so much better, now I have something to argue. But I cannot argue that with the insurance companies, because there are, as we know, a lot of companies that don't do any training. I mean, we have companies right now, like one of my students called me up and said that she was hired to do relief work for like people who were going on maternity leave or whatever. And what she found out was they just put her on the schedule and with her hours, and she was just popping around to cases because they basically wanted to max out the hours. There is no way that that's effective, and we all know that, right? But it's not illegal either.